still think that in reality, once they get to the campus environment down there, I do think that it's as safe, if not safer, than their homes where they are, because they don't have to go out and contact with other people all the time. So I do think if they can get down there, there's a chance it would work. But I have to be honest, my confidence level has really dropped since the beginning of this. And there is an increasing chance that we are not going to get basketball, which, seemed reasonable a few months ago, but seemed unthinkable a couple weeks ago. And that's just reflective, I think, of the crisis, don't you think, of how quickly everything's changing?
Yeah, this is not the league's fault. It's not the players' fault. It's not Adam Silver's fault. They're doing everything they can to make this happen. They are doing everything right. They do not deserve any criticism. They can't help the fact that people are getting sick. This isn't just affecting NBA players. This is affecting the world. People are still dying from this disease that we are learning a lot about and still have much to learn. That's my biggest problem. The basketball fan in me says, great, it's going to be awesome to watch. I don't care who's suiting up for whose teams. It's NBA basketball. It's going to be awesome. But then the sensible part of me is like, well, at what cost? That's my biggest problem. So, look, yeah. I'm not going to sit here and say if the NBA's back, I'm going to be miserable and giving them crap for it, all the way through October. No, we're going to be breaking down games and matchups and who advances and who even shows up. There's a lot to break down, a lot of conversation to be had. But right now, while we're still in the building stages, while the games are just under a month away, I have some problems. And if any more positive cases come out, there's going to be some trouble.
Absolutely. And we're going to jump in to the schedule that was just released in a second. But I wanted to ask you a question, because I think you have a great take on this. And, obviously you've had firsthand experience, and I'm sorry you've had that experience, but, I'm glad that you're okay now. And I think for some people who maybe don't know what it's like, it's nice to have someone who has some experience with COVID and be able to talk about it. But I'm curious, do you think that other players in other leagues right now are watching what the NBA is doing? Because the NBA is going to be the first league in the U.S. to resume, basically. I mean, there's some little things that are going on, but the major league, the first major league that's going to come back is going to be the NBA. Do you think MLB players, NFL players, and NHL players are watching what's going on with the NBA and wondering what's going to happen in their sports?
Yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, the NBA is probably the easiest to test because they have the smallest roster sizes, the smallest traveling parties. Major League Baseball, you have 40-man rosters, coaching staffs, trainers. In the NFL, just the players suiting up on game day for one team is the size of an entire NBA team's traveling party. So we're talking a lot more people, a lot more testing, a lot more precautions, particularly for baseball and football, which I think will be really difficult to pull off at this juncture.
Yeah.
The NBA is the best suited to try, but it's not working right now. Now, if these players get better and they opt in and no one else backs out and cases go down, which we all hope and pray for, but the way some people are acting and not listening in this world right now, it feels like a pipe dream. I'll feel better.
Yeah.
But right now, I don't feel great about it. So we'll see what happens in the coming days. Because they're supposed to leave for Orlando right after 4th of July weekend. So teams are going to start heading down. Once they're in the bubble, I'll feel better. But right now, I am just all over the place about
it. And I think the other thing that's going to be really fascinating, and I think everyone should really watch this. The NHL and the NBA have made the decision to find cities that they are going to go to play, neutral site locations where they can essentially quarantine everyone. The NHL is going to have 2. The NBA obviously has 1. We mentioned it, Orlando. The difference is the NFL and the MLB are planning to have everything in home markets. And I am very dubious, Jason, of how that's going to work, especially with the larger team sizes. And the additional kind of addendum to that is going to be that when the NHL and NBA come back for next season, what do they do? Because this is, I think this is only possible because they have this bubble, this campus environment. What happens when that goes away? What happens when we don't have that anymore? How do these leagues respond? And I don't have the answers yet, but I'm curious to see if we start hearing stories trickle out about that, because MLB has not figured that part out. And NFL certainly hasn't done so. And it's going to be impossible, frankly, for the NFL. As you mentioned, 53-man rosters. You've got coaching staffs, training staffs. I mean, you're probably talking 100 people for an NFL team. You can't have 30 of those in one place. You'd be talking thousands of people, plus the staff to take care of them, which is not possible. And so what do these other sports do, and what even do the NBA and NHL do once it comes down to that? So I think that's going to be something to really watch, Jason. But any kind of final thoughts on this? I mean, I know this is an emotional issue for you too, something that hits kind of close to home. I mean, is there anything else you want to add to kind of the restart and why, you're kind of skeptical or even dubious about its ability to return or its safety to do so?
I think we covered most of the basis. I appreciate you giving me that platform to kind of just say how I feel. Up until a few days ago, I was fine, but ever since Malcolm Brogdon came down with the positive test and more positive tests were announced and names started getting leaked, and as a result, even players who were healthy are dropping out, it's just not a good feeling, man. Like, I hope things get better. I hope they get back to it. I want to see them play, but health and safety first. None of these leagues know what they're doing right now. The world doesn't know what it's doing right now. We have never faced something like this. How do you think people felt during, like, the polio outbreak when there wasn't all this media? Or, the Great Depression. We weren't here for that. But we are living through our own catastrophes right now. And there's two of them. It's not just the pandemic. It's Black Lives Matter. It's so many historical breakthroughs happening at one time. It's just, where do sports fit in? They don't.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here.
And I was excited about player movement. I mean, even with the opt-outs, Avery Bradley and Wilson Chandler. And, you and I would usually be joking that J.R. Smith is back in the NBA after almost a 2-year layoff.
With Dion Waiters. Those guys are going to be in the same quarantine bubble on the same airplane.
We all know they're both bringing the recreational drugs. That's why they're
Dion's got the gummies, but take a few bucks this time, Dion.
Yeah, they're not being tested for it. So what else,
Well, you mentioned J.R. Smith, who by all accounts is going to be with the Lakers. There's a few other names that we might see trickle in to replace guys. But the big news, Jason, was that the NBA schedule was released. I don't know if I would say the big news. I think, you could argue the big news is some of the names you mentioned where, guys like Nikola Jokic, who we talked about, guys like Malcolm Brogdon. I had my brain died there for a second. Spencer Dinwiddie, DeAndre Jordan, some of these big names who are testing positive, and obviously the names that are opting out, like Davis Bertans, Avery Bradley, who you mentioned. That might be the biggest thing. Trevor Ariza is another one. But the other news was the schedule coming out, and it looks pretty good, Jason. I mean, there's going to be some really good games in here because there's not many bad teams here. I mean, unfortunately, I think your Nets might qualify without a bunch of the guys there. I mean, the Nets are not going to be, at full strength, obviously, but they're going to be weakened. The Wizards, the Suns, the Spurs, there's some big losses, and also those teams were not necessarily having the strongest records even beforehand. So, I mean, looking at the schedule, what jumped out to you right off the bat when you saw that?
So each team gets 8 games each, and they're playing for seeding. I think only a couple teams have their seeding virtually locked in. I mean, even with the Nets fielding a bunch of G Leaguers, it's going to be virtually impossible for the Wizards to catch up, especially since the Nets have, I believe, the second easiest schedule out of the 22 going into Orlando. I believe the Sixers have the easiest out of all the 22 teams. So I just like the competition right off the bat, right? July 30th, you have Jazz Pelicans. Zion's been working out because he's been allowed inside the Pelicans facility, rehabbing injuries. So he looks like he's raring to go. Multiple sources say that he's raring to go. And then you have Lakers Clippers. And, I think the Clippers will benefit if their players could stay healthy more than any other team from this pandemic, because if they go into a 7-game conference final series with those Lakers, It's not going to be a 7-game at Staples Center where there's more Laker fans and Clippers fans. So they might look at that as a competitive edge. You know, it's a neutral site. You're not going to have a Laker-heavy crowd, even on nights where the Clippers are the home team. So I think starting that off right off the bat is great. And then the other main thing that really jumps out to me are the timing of the games, because we're going to have games from 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon all the way up till midnight. So I'm going to tell my job I cannot get much work done because there's going to be a ton of basketball to watch. And, you know, after we got that difficult part of the podcast out of the way where I'm saying they should pull the plug, now just talking about the schedule, I am getting excited. Again, health and safety first, of course. But just being able to watch the NBA 10 hours a day is going to feel like a huge boost after missing it for so long. So I will give the league that, and I am hoping it happens. It's just scary times.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is just it's going to be nice to have some, like, I mean, I have to be careful with the way that I say this. I don't want to be distracted from, obviously, the social justice piece of this. I mean, I think it's important for us to stay there and stay uncomfortable, frankly, and be in that place and really continue to fight for the rights of a lot of people in this country and also just to improve where we're at. But at the same time, we do need things to take our minds off of some of the issues we're having with Corona and so on. And I think that the fact that the NBA is going to be back is going to be nice. But when I look at the schedule, a few things that jumped out at me is, one, the Pelicans. So I believe the Pelicans have the easiest schedule. And my goodness, I mean, they're going to have a real chance. I don't know if they're going to be able to catch the Grizzlies. But I think they have a major advantage in that race at this point. They're basically tied with the Kings and the Blazers, but they have a much easier schedule than those guys. So I think there's a really good chance that they're the team that ends up with the playoff if there is one. I think you're right about the Nets. I think they're going to be pretty much locked in, although I wonder if the Magic could catch them. We'll see how that goes. And that kind of brings me to the biggest thing is the seeding battles are going to be important because while, as you mentioned, there's no home court advantage, there's a huge advantage in who you're playing. And the ones that come to me, Jason, I'm going to play a game with you where I kind of want us to pick which are the teams you'd want to avoid in each conference. So the races that we have right now, in the East, we have Bucks, then Raptors, Celtics, Heat, Pacers, Sixers, Nets, and Magic. And then in the West, we have Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, Jazz, Thunder, Rockets, Mavericks, and then there's the Grizzlies along with the Blazers, Pelicans, Kings, Spurs, and Suns. So basically, the number one seeds are locked up. The Lakers have pretty much locked up the 1 seed. The Bucks have pretty much locked up the 1 seed. The Raptors have a 3-game lead on the Celtics. The Clippers have only a 1.5-game lead on the Nuggets. So really what you're looking at is 2-7 to some degree in the West, but mostly you're talking about something more along the lines of Clippers and Nuggets and then Jazz down to Mavericks, where could the Clippers and Nuggets switch spots? Certainly. And then the same kind of thing in the East where the Raptors and the Celtics are 3 games apart, and then the other teams from Philly to the Heat, those guys are only 2 games apart. So when we look at that, if you're one of these teams, Jason, who are in let's say the 4, 5, 6, 7 in those 2 conferences, 4, 5, 6 for the East and 4, 5, 6, 7. So right now that would be the Heat, Pacers, Sixers in the East, and the Nuggets, the Jazz, Thunder, Rockets, and Mavericks in the West. I mean, what are the teams that you're really looking to avoid? Like, who do you think here has a chance to be, more dangerous that you'd want to avoid if you were one of those seeds? Let's start with the East.
I'm going to give you, so I have 2 in the East and 1 in the West. The 2 in the East are the Raptors and the Heat. The Raptors being the defending champions, they're in Florida already, so they have a competitive advantage. They're able to practice, albeit social distancing. They're able to get in there, and I think their conditioning, they're going to be full steam ahead, partially because they couldn't get back into Canada. So those that stayed in the States just went down to Fort Myers. They convened there. They have that championship pedigree even without Kawhi Leonard. The majority of that core was on last year's title team. I think that's going to serve huge. Then the Heat. because before Florida cases spiked, especially in South Florida,